Okay, I think we are live on our first Swiss webinar. Here at Darwin, we specialise in placing IT specialists across Europe into different verticals. Myself, Megan, and my colleague Phoebe, who's sitting next to me, we specialise in PHP placements in Switzerland. Obviously, the question, is PHP a dying language, is a hot topic. It's clickbait, but it's relevant in the market. So we've got a couple of guys here tonight who are going to hopefully shed their opinion on, is PHP a dying language? What can we do to stay relevant in the market? We've got Henrik who's speaking, he's CTO. We've got Johannes, he's a head of development. So hopefully we'll get some good opinions coming out here. So I'm going to go to Henrik. You just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do and how you got into the role that you're in now.
Yeah, hello, my name is Henrik. I'm working as a CTO at Amorana.ch, and I have like 20 years experience in the market. I starting out with PHP 4 actually, when it was like the strange language from Sweden, I think. And I grew with the language for 20 years and seen the major changes between the versions. So I kind of like the direction which PHP moves at the moment. But I also see different movements outside of PHP who are going in different directions. So I have a biased opinion about PHP at the moment.
Hi, sorry about that. My name is Phoebe, as Megan's already mentioned, and I am a specialist recruiter here and mainly focused on placing PHP candidates into PHP roles across Switzerland. So our second speaker is Johannes Rebhan, who is the head of development at Koch Communication. So Johannes, introduce yourself.
You just did that, but yeah, my name's Johannes, and I work at Koch Communication in Frauenfeld as a head of development. We're mainly an agency doing Typo 3 systems, which is based on PHP. And I'm actually a fan of PHP. Just as like Henrik, I started when PHP 4 was relatively new. So I know it from a long time ago. And it's a fun language, and I don't see it dying so far. But yeah, let's see what we come up with after this evening.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump straight in then with the big question. Is PHP a dying language? Why are people thinking that? Where has this come from?
In my personal opinion, it's coming from the major shift in web technologies at the moment, where everything moves to the client side, like React and the other JavaScript systems out there. So PHP is moving back to the server side because it's not that agile regarding the user interface. And I think at the moment PHP changes its role inside the market to a server side language.
I agree with Henrik in that regard. I also think that it might be also a misconception, because just like Node.js or JavaScript in general being the hyped kid, so to speak, at this moment in time, just pushed many languages in the background. For example, even Java got a bad rap for the last 10 years, and it's still going strong. And the same is true for PHP, I think. Just because one language is now the hype focus of a group of developers, even with it being such high rank in GitHub, doesn't mean that all the other languages are automatically dead or dying. That's at least my opinion.
Okay, great. There's some really, really good points, and we've actually had a lot of our network come back, asking these kind of questions. So the second question that we actually have is, how has PHP evolved over time, and where do you see the language going in the future?
You want to start, Henrik?
Okay, maybe. I mean, it's coming actually from the demand that static HTML sites was not that much fun. You have to develop everything from scratch for every information you want to present. So dynamic content was kind of the need at the time when it was developed. And from there it goes a long way from like a small CGI script where you can just display the name of the user who visit your site to a system where you can actually pull a lot of data, displaying grids of information and manipulate, change them live on the site. And so the language, in my opinion, changed there from this purely procedural version to object-oriented version, like in version 5, where they getting this deep dive into the performance when they start doing object-oriented stuff. And now with version 7, they're actually going into a full-fledged typed language, which is kind of really nice, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I can, obviously only mirror Henrik's experience in that regard, because those are facts. There's nothing to argue. PHP is now a nearly fully typed language with PHP 7. I also think that they made great strides in making the executable of PHP itself smaller and investing in systems like APCU, which is great standard caching or opcode cache, which makes the language much, 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 much faster than it was just 5 years ago. And there are attempts, for example, with React PHP to recreate some of the hype that surrounded the non-blocking JavaScript stuff in the PHP world too, and it works too, and it performs great. It just has for each process that's being created for PHP a larger memory footprint than JavaScript, but the performance is great, and it has a lot of the benefits that come from non-blocking approaches into the JavaScript world in PHP too.
Well, I kind of have my own question here that off the back of that is obviously JavaScript is seen as quite a big rival at the moment, especially with things like Node.js. I mean, people look at JavaScript, it's cool, it's sexy. Why doesn't PHP have this same kind of image when it essentially can do the same thing on the back end as something like Node?
It comes from the JavaScript coming from the front end. And there's so much more front-end developers than back-end developers. And most of the front-end guys also are more graphical guys. Many of them are younger programmers. And that makes, of course, their language much more hip and more agile, seemingly. I think because JavaScript, if you look at it from a language design perspective, it's quite an ugly language. It has so many type problems. It's so unreliable in cases, and it behaves sometimes so erratically and weird that it's not really a fun language to code in, but it's a great language because you only need to know one language in the front and the back end, and it has this amazingly fast and small memory footprint for processes, which is why Node.js actually got so big so fast, because you can do so many awesome things with this small memory footprint per language process. And that's something that no other language at the moment on the level of JavaScript can offer. That's, I think, why it's so hip, because the non-blocking part was so, not say overhyped, but it's something that, for example, if you have a startup company and they say, hey, look, our software can scale from 10,000 to 1 million users, then that's an argument that you can say, wow, that's really amazing. But it doesn't mean that it already has great performance. You can have a PHP app outperforming JavaScript in the lower ends, so in the lower numbers. You can have 50,000 concurrent users on your great application in PHP, and it will perform just fine. But there will be a point where the blocking and non-blocking I/O stuff will have a sharp cutoff where the PHP just stops working and the JavaScript will keep on going. And that's, I think, there's like this misconception. Not every one of us develops software for 1 million concurrent users. Most of us actually don't. And that's why I think JavaScript, in a way, even if it's a great tool for what it is, it's a bit overhyped in terms of it's the language for everything, everywhere.
Henrik, do you have an opinion on that topic as well? You look like you've got something to say.
I kind of have to say I think that the JavaScript part is essentially true, that it scales much better in the regard of a lot of users. On the other side, the integrity of JavaScript is not that good. So you can, in my personal opinion, of course, you can do much more secure or secured stuff, which not breaking you right away when something unforeseen happens in PHP than in JavaScript. So if you really need something who works stable most of the times and don't do weird stuff, I would tend to not use JavaScript at all.
There's some, as I said, some really great points there, and I think this is important because, as we've said, we've noticed that a lot of companies are now integrating Node.js into the backend rather than using PHP. So, yeah, Johannes, what you were saying about, it being so fast and, fast moving, I think that's something that, is, I don't know, just something that I think is good to know, especially as recruiters. We want to know how also we can stay relevant in the market, in a sense, which I suppose is what goes on to my next question. So a lot of people have actually asked what they need to be doing to stay relevant in the PHP market. So, I don't know, Johannes, do you want to kick this one off?
What do you mean with? I'm sorry, there's a little frog coming in. What developers need to be doing to stay relevant in the PHP market. I think what they have to do in every programming language market, they need to evolve with the language. So, for example, in PHP, we have for a couple of versions, we have traits, we have stuff like that. You should use it. You have generators, you should use it. They're great, they're awesome. They come from different languages, for example, from Java or from Python, in terms of something like generators, which are so much fun and so awesome when you develop. And you need to stay on top of things, because the language designers from most languages, they offer you sometimes tools that will disrupt the way you program and force you to rethink your ways of doing. And that's something, but it's a general truth in programming. You can never stay on your spot. You always have to move with what's happening and try to improve yourself every day, and then you'll be relevant for the future.
I suppose that was a pretty self-explanatory answer in a sense, but yeah, it's a good answer still. Henrik, would you like to follow up with that?
I mean, I wholeheartedly concur with the assessment that you always have to move forward and see what's beyond the bend of the language at the moment. So in regarding coming back to PHP a little bit, I think you have to decide for yourself where you want to go as a programmer and as with the language. So in my personal opinion, I think PHP will go much more into the server side. So if you really want to develop backend logic and business logic stuff, PHP will be a great language, and so you can just move forward with the language. So, but there you have to go with really approved patterns, like the code has to be robust, good exception handling, such stuff. So I think not the language as a state of the art technology is the problem, but the technologies you use to implement the language. So more the theoretical stuff behind programming is what keeps you in the field and in the work.
Okay, this kind of leads back into things like frameworks. Like I said, the theory behind it is what's kind of important. But we see a lot of competition in the market between things like Symfony, Laravel. Obviously, you guys work with things like Magento, Typo 3. Is one of these more relevant than the other? What is it that people should be learning to make sure that they can, get as many opportunities in the market as possible if they are sticking with PHP?
I would say it depends. Actually, every framework has its ups and downs. For example, Symfony is something like a jack of all trades. You can do everything and anything with it, but on the other side, it's not very specialized. If you do want something like for e-commerce, maybe Magento is a better fit. So it depends totally on what you want to do with it. When you're looking for something really sleek and fast and streamlined, something like Silex or the other small frameworks is also a good fit. But it depends totally on what you want to do. And there is, in my personal opinion, the biggest problem. You don't know what you want to do before you do it. So kind of a lot of people tend to stick to the frameworks they used to use because they don't know where they were going at the moment or where their product will evolve into. This is maybe the biggest problem there.
Okay, cool. So it's kind of there's no one fix for everything. You need to know a bit of everything if you're going to go for everything.
There is no silver bullet. Never, ever.
Yeah, there's no Swiss Army knife for languages, even if the JavaScript guys pretend it's JavaScript, but it's not.
Okay, well, what would you guys look for specifically then? If you had a young, eager candidate, PHP developer, what key skills would you be looking for in that profile to bring them into the business?
That he doesn't only know PHP, but typo 3 in this case. But yeah, we're a specialized company, so I think it's always the same answer. Your core tech should be at least familiar for the guy you're hiring. Otherwise, you spend a lot of resources to build that guy up. Of course, there need to be companies who actually do that, because else no one ever can grow. But at least in the terms of web agencies, we usually have such strict deadlines, so much project pressure that we rarely have the leeway to invest a lot of time building people up. We need at least someone who can hit the ground running in some way. And then we can take him along and build him up and give him the experience that he needs. But yeah, if you want to work, at least in our agency, you should be at least familiar with the typo 3 system, with the backend, with tidbits of the framework. And then we can take you on the journey of your life.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, but so just kind of, I suppose, following on from that as well, people are, we've already mentioned that Node.js, could rival or is currently rivaling PHP in the market, but a lot of people are coming back just asking, what benefits PHP has in the market over other languages. So it'd be good to, know both of your thoughts on this, really. I'm sure you have many.
I mean, for me, PHP, it's one of the biggest benefits is readily available almost everywhere. If you need for a small project some hosting or a server, and you say you need a language, PHP is always on the machine. Integrated in the web browser, you can just start. So it's kind of from the get-go. You don't have to install anything. When you're going for, say, something specialized like a Node server, you have to look a little bit harder to find actually the right environment. I mean, today when you're going with Docker containers and cloud computing, it's kind of not that important anymore. But still, for a small project, it's easy to go and get a PHP site.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, which I completely agree with, one of the strong points of PHP is that it has so many mature systems that you can use as a company, especially as a company, because you need to have stuff that you can rely on, and you can only rely on stuff that has matured. If you use 0.1 software, then you're fooling yourself, because the risk you put on your company by deciding to use beta software is so high that in 3 years' time, if you still work at the company, you'll see the technical debt eating your legs away, and you don't want that. So with PHP, you can choose any of the super mature frameworks like Laravel, like Symfony, or even the smaller ones, they're still at least 5 to 6 years matured software. You can use CMS systems like Typo 3 or like Drupal, which is quite mature as a system. You can use Magento, which has such a huge install base, and this is one of the biggest selling points with PHP for me, because as a language, I like it, but I don't love it. For example, I love Python. I think that's a great language from a system design wise. But when you look for a great CMS in the Python world, you get this one, and it calls Django CMS, and it says now Mercedes-Benz is using us. This is great. And you look at their install base, and they have 300 installed systems. 300, that's nothing in the CMS space. Typo 3 has 150,000 and growing install base systems where it's installed. And that's, for me, is a selling point. When you want to sell a system, a language, or whatever to your manager, you have to invest into something that will save your company the risk in 5 years or 10 years. And then you can't use something that has an install base that you can count with your hands.
That's actually a very good point there, especially about a company like saying, yeah, Mercedes is using this. Do consumers really care what you're using? Do they go, oh, you're working with Typo 3, I don't want that? Or is it just you show them what PHP can do and what the CMS tools can do, and then they just buy into that?
And from an agency perspective, you need to have a system that the managers know, because they will hire you to do a pitch based on the systems you support, because they rarely are so open and that you can completely win them over of a system they don't know. That sometimes happens, but most of the time they need to know the buzzwords. And that's why it's also good to have a system like a Typo 3, which is it's a known name. Or if you use Magento or you use Oxid, if you have a system that managers have heard of, that's always a good thing, because then you don't have a tough sell. You only have to sell yourself. You don't have to sell the software that you use. And that's at least in the agency space. I don't know, Henrik, you have something to add? I don't know how your business is structured.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. When you have a system which is known to you, it's much easier to get it sold to you. On the other hand, I personally always looking on how the update cycle of the software is, how often they do major changes, because I know when a software changes, there is a major version number. There's a lot of work to do for me as an business owner, because I have to invest into the upgrade to the next version, because it's not free. Usually, it's not free. So
Typo 3, it is. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the modules you developed yourself or has developed inside the company has to fit the new environment, and you have to upgrade them. So there has to be some work left. If not, there would be a major version where they can actually introduce breaking changes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise that it was my next question, basically. So I suppose something that is, a good question to ask is that if PHP is still something that consumers want, because in that respect, I suppose what better people to ask than, both of you. Johannes, you've been out with your clients today as well, so you probably understand that already. So would you like to answer that?
I will. Yeah, I think that consumers don't care about languages. They just don't. And even the managers that you sell your Typo 3 to, they don't care that it's PHP. The thing that wins them over is if you tell them it's mature and it doesn't cost you a dime, and then they're really happy. But everything else, if you tell them, oh, it's such a great language and it's sexy and it's awesome to write it, they just don't care. That's at least my experience.
Okay, well, that's good for you, I suppose. As you said as well, it's totally free to use. So that's something I suppose that's also a win-win for you and also your clients as well. But Henrik, what are your thoughts on that?
I have to actually agree here because it's totally irrelevant what technology you use. The users want features. When you tell them you can take the system, put all your products in it, and it will sell everything in minutes. They will just buy it. They don't care about the technology and anything. On the other hand, when you're working or when you're trying to sell something to a mature company where they are falling into the usual pitfalls of startups, where they're using a beta software and then the company who develops the beta software just evaporates into thin air, and they have to do it from scratch because they can't migrate to anything. And then you have to actually go with the update cycle and with the information how you can actually get the software running for a long time.
Okay, well, it does sound like both of you have a similar opinion in terms of they don't really care what it is. But I suppose that in a sense that's good for us to know because, more recently, as I said, we have seen a lot of companies kind of integrate their technology from PHP to Node. But now I know that that's the case, and I hope that, a lot of clients kind of stay using PHP. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about that.
I mean, there are still companies out there using Delphi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you always have to think about it. I think there is a life cycle to every system, every software system you use. There's these hype phase, and there's consolidation over a couple of times, and then there's a better system, and everybody moves to the better system. But still, there are like companies who are moving really, really slow. For example, the one example that's really getting to me is like relational database like MySQL. When I was in the university, it was really big thing. Everybody was moving to relational databases. And after a while, I talked with a professor, and he told me there are still big companies out there using hierarchical databases because they can't move like tomorrow, because they has a lot of systems attached to their databases. And I think it's the same thing here. There are companies out there, they have a core system working on PHP and a lot of other systems attached to their core system. They can just move away from their core system because they would go out of business in an instant because they just lost their tech base.
Johannes, so I could see you smiling and laughing at the bottom of the screen. Do you have anything to add on to that?
On the topic of people moving away from PHP to Node.js, I think that it's also important, just as Henrik said, many of the companies that move from PHP to Node.js, you have to carefully look what they move from Node.js, from PHP to Node.js. It's like in Pinterest, they started with Python, I think, should be even Django, if I'm not mistaken. And now they moved system components to Node.js, and everyone's like, here you see, Python's crap, even Pinterest is moving. Actually, they moved specific components that are really heavily taxed but simple to code and simply structured, and that can be put into a self-contained component, and they implement those in Node.js, which is exactly how you should use Node.js. I think you shouldn't use Node.js to program a typo 3, for example. But if you have a microservice or a collection of microservices, then Node.js is the way to go. It's a great software, it's a great system to implement microservices because it's so lightweight and blah blah blah. We all know the reasons. And the same happens with PHP. You have PHP core tech that is used in companies, and then you see them moving away to Node.js for specific components, while the core would stay with PHP or Java or whatever for years to come. And yeah, because sometimes the engineering required to port something that is really big from PHP or any other structured, object-oriented system design language, for example, Java, to Node.js the risk is really high, and you might end up with a collection of awesome microservices that no one can understand anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go first, Eric.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you try to move from an old system, there are basically two versions. To just buy a new one, migrate the data, and forget everything old. It's kind of risky, or you move parts to a new system. Second one took longer, but it's much safer on the company. I mean, no CEO wants to hear our systems are down because of the migration, so we kind of have to fix it for a couple of days.
There's a great example, by the way, that most of guys who are watching even this might have recognized, and it's called Firefox. Most of you know the browser Firefox, and they recently, for the last 1.5 to 2 years, have moved specific components of their software away from C++ written to Rust written components. Rust is their new language that they developed, and they remove specific components to port over the software step by step. And I think that's a really smart way to do it. And it's the same happens with PHP and Node.js.
I actually can't remember the last time I used Firefox.
It's great again. Use it again.
It works again. I think this is the risk, though, isn't it? Something minuscule happens, it stops working for a little bit, and people don't go back. Do you think that's a risk with, obviously, PHP as well? Do you think there was a period it got a bit messy, the legacy code was a bit messy, and people have just decided to avoid it? Do you think people can come back from that?
Henrik, you got a point for that?
It's hard to say. I mean, usually software developers are really not that thinky that they're moving to a different language because something doesn't work. I actually don't know a developer who is like that at all.
I think with PHP, it happens with version 5 taking so long to become version 6. I think that's the point where PHP lost so much popularity, when people said the developers don't get their shit together and they don't come up with a new version, and nothing happened for years. And you had, like, for people following the development at least, you could see like branches going off. You have PHP new, PHP 6, PHP whatever, alternative PHP. You had so many branches, and everyone had their big opinion. Then you had Facebook coming up with their HHVM, and everyone was discussing on the mailing lists back then, and they were insulting each other, who was right and what's the right direction to go. And that's why we have PHP 5 and PHP 7, because there's this black hole in the middle where PHP did a lot of stuff wrong, and so they skipped the version 6, and that's a good thing. But that's the point in time where I would say PHP lost a lot of attention undeservedly to that argument in the open source community.
Yeah. And what's really, you're right, actually. And it was really untimely, because at that moment, the JavaScript frameworks like popping up like mushrooms.
So do you think it can come back? Do you think PHP 7 is going to bring developers back in, and everyone's going to start getting on again, and it's going to push Node.js out of the market?
I have to admit, I think PHP now attracts different kind of developers. I mean, the developers who are starting out with PHP 4, for example, they're really similar to the developers who are using now Node.js. They want to do something quick, fast, and dirty. And now you can do that in PHP 7 so easily anymore, because there are a lot of restrictions in the language and a lot of code guidelines. So I think PHP 7 attracts more mature developers who are needing a reliable language for a specific task they want to fill, and not these, I need some guest book on my site, so using Node.js or a PHP 4 in its time.
Okay, cool. We have had a lot of young developers, people who are kind of deciding what languages they want to learn. So I think, kind of as a final question, I want to open it up to you guys. What advice would you give young developers, what should they be learning in PHP? What frameworks? What should they focus on? What advice can you give?
Okay, this is actually quite a tough question, but I would say my advice would be to learn one of each, one compiler language and one script language, like PHP and C or .NET or Java, where you can see the differences between these two kind of systems. And when you have these basics down, you can move to every framework. It means the frameworks are like in concept. You can just apply the concept to every language, and every language apply to a concept. So then a framework is actually the fit to your need. When you say I need something to do a small site with external services and as a microservice, Silex. If you want to do a complex website with a lot of components, and then it's maybe Symfony or Laravel, or so it's kind of, don't stuck too much on a framework, because it is about to change when you're changing jobs, usually.
Excellent. And Johannes, what's your take on it? What would you tell young developers? Is it similar to Henrik, or have you got some different advice?
No, I think that it's always a good idea to stand on many legs, especially when I think many web programmers, they just start with JavaScript or with PHP or some other interpreted language, and they lack some of the knowledge of the stuff that goes on underneath, which in the end, when you have bigger systems and more complex software with more gears coming together, that's where you see them using specific types of database fields that are really unperformant, or that don't make a lot of sense. Or you see PHP now moving to types, and everyone getting completely confused, because what are types? I had always this dollar stuff and it worked everywhere and it was magical, and now suddenly types come in and everyone stumbles around like a headless chicken. That's not good. That's why I think people should learn one complex language. It doesn't need to be PHP, because now it is a fully fledged system that you can use on par with most of the other even compiled languages, and you can have your fun language that's interpreted, for example, a script language, be it Swift or be it Python or JavaScript or whatever. Because if you're a PHP programmer and you work in the web space, then oftentimes you will get in contact with JavaScript anyway. So you can use, let's say, JavaScript, but try to learn it on a software engineering level. And PHP and JavaScript you can use in the browser to have fun, to learn what the cool guys think is awesome. No, I like JavaScript, by the way. I'm programming it too. So it's just that the hype is so, sometimes you get an opposite reaction to something that's overhyped, even if it's not completely fair, and because JavaScript is awesome in its own way and horrible in another way. But yeah, I would say learn a good software engineering language and your fun language that you can do your hobby projects in, be it Python, Swift, JavaScript, whatever.
Excellent. I think that about covers everything we kind of had on this topic. Obviously, it's a big question. It can go in a lot of different directions. But we have kind of covered off the main questions that people wanted to know. So was there anything you guys wanted to add before we finished up? Any points that you want to make on the topic? Feel free to say no.
I don't know. You go, Henrik. Maybe I get an inspiration.
I mean, maybe some general advice here. What I found out, it's really crucial is when you're working alone, it's not relevant. But when you're working in a team, communication is key, and communication works on different levels. So of course, meetings and stuff are important too. But in the end, when programmers are talking and communicating, it's a lot text-based, and usually they're exchanging code snippets, and if they're not understandable at all and not documented at all, it is really hard to work with people together. So if you start on programming anything, start with document your stuff and write it so that you can understand it in half a year. I mean, it's very general, but I think it's important information you could not repeat enough.
I think there was this, I said it, I forgot who said it, but it was a great example, like a saying of how you can think it. You write your code to be read by other humans, and the fact that the computer has to interpret and execute it is like a happy side effect of it. And I think if you write your code with that thought in mind, you might write code that's better code. And most of the time, I see code that's really, really readable and easy. Then it comes from very experienced programmers. And I see obscure code that has fancy tricks in it that often comes from unexperienced programmers because they think their code needs to look smart. But it doesn't need to look smart. It needs to look readable and understandable. And the more you focus on that, the better your code and your teammates will be.
I like that this general last opinion from you both is just, we don't care how you do it, as long as we can understand how you did it. Which, yeah, I think goes for pretty much everything in life. But yeah, we're going to close it off there. Like, thanks for your time and your opinions. And I'm sure that this webinar will spark many questions for, you know, future webinars that we can host. Hopefully you guys want to get involved again and speak again on different topics to do with PHP. Maybe we can specialize more, maybe even on typo free, Magento, and go down like a more specific route. But for now, I think we've covered it off. PHP is not dying.
No.
Yeah. Thank God.
What?
But yeah, thanks for your time again, everyone watching and everyone who will watch in future. I hope it's been really, really informative, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Bye.